Hey everybody, it's Laurie-Ann here, and we are going to be talking all about stories and why you need stories on stage when you're doing discovery calls. Everywhere you should just be telling stories. It's because our brains just love stories. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. As a matter of fact, our brains love stories 22 times more. It will remember a good story than it will a good fact. So keep that in mind. So I'm just going to share this to my private group and just make some little changes here on the screen. And feel free to tell me where you're watching from today. Tell me where you're watching the replay from. And let's see. How was your weekend? For some reason, my eyes feel a little tired today. Oh. Let's see, there and there. So let's start talking about stories. And how many of you are telling stories, when you are working with people, when you're answering their questions? In the world of speaking, we talk about stories because your audience can actually see themselves in the story. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about brain science again today and sharing that with you and just helping you, teach you some of the steps, the different phases that are in a well-crafted story, and I'll give you a couple of resources as well. So when we tell stories, one of the things that I tell leaders is to tell stories in order to engage people, to motivate them, to inspire them. Stories is just a phenomenal way to do that. And because it actually activates different parts of the brain. We can see the story. We can see ourselves in the story. We can feel the story. There's this emotional connection. How many of you watched a movie over the weekend? Watched a movie or a TV show? All of those are really good stories that are beginning to end. How many of you have rewatched stories? Why don't you just share below what one of your favorite movies is of all time that off the top of your head, you have watched a number of times. A couple of mine are Under the Tuscan Sun, Pretty Woman, and one of my favorite all-time movies is Gone with the Wind. And so right there, there's a story, a beginning and an end, and we can just see ourselves in the story. And our brains love, I think of it as your brain is desiring, these stories and will soak them up like a sponge. And the best part about stories is your stories, that's what people can repeat. A good story will be memorable and repeatable. And that's what you want, your potential hot leads, your customers, people that you've had conversations with. They may not remember exactly what you do, but if you tell what you do in the form of a story, the likelihood of them remembering that is so much greater. So you've got to tell stories. And just want to have a shout out to Sarah. Sarah's joining us from Europe, and some of her favorite movies, she says, is The Holiday. Oh, that is a great movie. I really like that one. And Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins is that's a great example, and hopefully I'll remember to come back to that as an example. So stories activate different parts of our brains. And let me just tell you a little bit about that. There's actually also a dopamine release with a story. And dopamine, if you're not familiar with neurotransmitters, that is the neurotransmitter of motivation and of reward. So a good story is going to release that, and that's one of those good, fun hormones, neurotransmitters, And going back to what I opened with, a good story, a memorable story, will be remembered 22 times more than the facts. the numbers that you might share in that story. Facts are processed actually in 2 areas of our brain, and a story actually is activated in more parts of the brain. So by telling a story, you're actually activating different parts of the brain, therefore making it a little more memorable. So, when I was writing one of my first books, I remember the editor saying to me, because both of my books, Rethink Leadership and Rethink Your Leadership, are modern day parables. And the reason why I chose to tell my information about leadership and personal development in the form of a story is because I knew it would be more memorable. And I also knew it would be a lot more fun to read. And that was exactly what I heard from people, that they could hardly wait to read the next chapter, to find out what was happening to the character. And because my books are actually intentionally short, I also had people say to me that, I would only allow myself to read like 1 chapter at a time. That way they could just kind of like absorb. And if you have read my books, at the end of each chapter, I always have questions. And the reason for the questions is to deepen the learning and to be able to apply the story of that chapter and apply that into your life. Now, my first book, Rethink Leadership, 4 Lessons to Make You Remarkable, is a non-gender book. And what do I mean by that? I don't say that the characters are male or female at all in the story. And the reason why I did that was that the characters will become what you need them to become. If you are looking for a male mentor, then in your head, while you're reading the story, you're envisioning a male mentor. And that particular book actually takes place like in a coffee shop similar to Starbucks. A place where people seem to meet at the same time every single day. So the story is memorable. And the second book is a book, another modern day parable, but this one has characters, male and female. It's one man's journey through leadership, through his own personal journey to become a better leader. And again, I told them both in story format because I knew that that was my way of like sort of getting people to read the book. You definitely want to know what's going to happen to the characters. You want to finish. I want to know what's the next message? What's the next lesson? And you just keep envisioning this particular story. So what I tell a lot of my private clients when we're working on their presentations or even their sales calls is to work on your stories, to show me, don't tell me. And because I want you to be able to tell a story in a way that the listener can envision, that they can see themselves in your story. They can see themselves having this crisis, going through this process, finding the guide who's going to help them, and then the solution, and being able to see that solution, being able to feel that solution, and this is also, telling stories is also a great way to get your clients, your audience, whether that's in a blog post, a video, a live stream, on the stage, to actually, take the call to action, because here's what can happen, not just telling them, but actually showing them, helping them picture what they're doing. So, I tell a lot of people that, like blogs, a lot of us are writing blogs. I've got a number of blogs, and blogs, we are scanners before we actually go back and read. So hence the reason why Google really wants you to put like all those nice bold subtitles. If you've got a blog that you're doing like 3 key ways to change blank, and to be able to say like tip 1, tip 2, tip 3, because we're scanning, and we're scanning emails as well. We're scanners before we are readers. So I always say, you want your emails to also look aesthetically pleasing, instead of like a bunch of paragraphs all jumbled together. Space it out, make it easy for people to scan and start, either start with some catchy information, but I also like to tell a story in there as well. Something that a story that either about myself, my past, or a client, so that people get to know me. They get to know me personally. They get to know what the lessons are, that the tips that I'm trying to teach people. So you get to see yourself sort of like in my world. So where else can you use? Why else would you be using stories? It's to motivate people. To inspire people, to move them to action. Let me know below in the comments. Are you telling stories? Are you telling stories either in your live streams, on stage, and or even on your website copy? Real critical. So let me tell you a story. Years ago, I met this gentleman named Tom Asacker, and he wrote the book Sandbox Wisdom, and it's a short book. And Tom Asacker is a branding specialist and works with a lot of big companies. So in Tom's book, Sandbox Wisdom, it is a story about a little girl who guides this older man. And, literally Sandbox Wisdom, seeing business through a child's eyes and walking the customer through. And I remember in the beginning of the book when the main character, and in the form of stories, this main character would be the hero of the story. The hero is the one that's going to go through the journey. And the little girl who he was hooked up with, can you imagine his surprise when he was asked to go meet this person, and then he finally gets there to see this person, and it's this little girl. Think elementary school. Imagine his surprise. Now, the elementary school girl is the guide who's going to help him, get rid of that pain, get rid of that problem. She's going to help him find the solution. And it's such a great story. And so, then there was the next book was how do I apply this? So it was, beyond the Sandbox Wisdom. And I remember once being in Bed Bath & Beyond, and there was some item that I was looking at, those mittens, the hand cream that you put on, then you put the mittens on, and it just really is supposed to deeply hydrate your hands. And this is great in the wintertime because I am in the Northeast. And, they're pricey. And I think it was probably the first time I'd ever seen something like this. And I thought, I wonder how well this works. Because let's admit it, there's a lot of interesting products that are out there. And the woman who just happened to approach me, she told me a story. She said, my friend bought these, who has super dry skin, so dry that they're cracked. She used these for a couple of nights and her hands are healing. Well, that's all she had to tell me. Now I can see myself in that story. I can visualize the story. And of course I bought it. I bought the mittens, I bought the slippers, I bought the deep hand cream, I bought the foot cream. I bought everything because of that story. One, because I could see myself in it, but I could also see the solution. I wanted soft feet. I want soft hands. I'm tired of putting on hand cream every 5 minutes because my hands are so dry. So that's the power of a good story. So let's see. Jen, I just want to give a little shout out to you. Jen is on the West Coast. And Sarah answered the question. I believe this is to the question of where are you telling stories? And you said on stage and on your website. That's right. And Sarah, you just came out with a book that I can't remember the title of it, but I do remember it's collaboration. So lots of stories, telling lots of stories on stage. In your web copy, in your emails with people. Recently, I wrote this Facebook post, and it was telling the story about, this is a number of years ago, my sister loves to be extras in movies. And she always had this dream, this goal, I want to let's do one together. And so she, happened to find one that happened to be right here in New Hampshire. And of course we did it together. And my job was to send in our acting resumes, which wasn't very much, and the headshots that we sent, I had to send in for them. Well, my sister's headshot was very serious, and she gets a part in the movie. She's one of the lawyers of this big law firm. My picture is rather flirty, and I got the part of the secretary that didn't have very good morals, was having the affair with the CEO. Well, during the course of this movie, it ends up being 2.5 hours long. And the director had hired a Hollywood consultant and told him that he had to cut out an hour's worth of material, stuff that didn't add to the story, to the main story of the movie before it can go live. So my part had nothing to do with the overall plot of this movie, and so it got cut. So I'm telling people about this story, and then bringing it back to speaking. And I got so many comments about, oh my God, that sounds like so much fun. Yes, I've been an extra also. And I also got a lot of people who said, don't leave us hanging. What movie was it? And you only see parts of me at one of the holiday parties. But you can see my sister, actually doing some acting in one of the boardroom scenes. So you want to use stories also in blogs and your social media posts. And here's the secret to the story. And you can have a really good signature story. You want to tell the story and then tell the lessons or the call to action that you want your audience to take away. So with a good story, there's one particular story that I do tell, and then I go on to tell the lesson, and then I tell almost like a little bit, one or two more sentences about the story that's it's almost like the punchline to a really good joke. And that's my signature jackknife story, which maybe one of these days I will tell you guys. So there are stories everywhere, and I know that a couple of months ago, if you go back to looking at some of the Facebook Lives, I did a free 3-day training in the beginning of September, and one of them is specifically on stories. This is a little bit more information, but if you want to go back, grab a pen and notebook and watch that particular episode, get ready to start writing some stories, because I give you tons of topics to think about your stories. And you think about your stories in the forms of what was your first, last, best, and worst. So that could be potentially 4 different stories. And you could take your first, a job, your first job, your last job, your worst job, your best job. There are stories everywhere. You just have to open up your eyes and start noticing that all of these stories are around you. So what kind of stories can you actually, use? Well, here's the question that I always ask my private clients, and that is, what are some of the objections that you get that maybe you're not handling so well? So, for example, with speaking, a lot of people think that they're not ready to start speaking. They think, I need to be in business a little bit longer. And a few years ago, I was asked to help with some speaking for it was a communications company that did consulting for a genetic company. The people who actually do genetic testing for breast cancer. And there was also another one. And so I was actually working with a group of physicians and teaching them how to have presentation skills, because they go out as authorities and they teach other doctors, medical dinners or medical conferences, and they will speak about the product, but also about how it's going to help other doctors help their patients. And I remember one woman who was a nurse practitioner asking the question. She was like, I'm a little intimidated because my audience knows more than me. So she's a nurse practitioner, has not gone to school as long as a medical doctor. And I told her that those people are in that room at that dinner wherever it is, and they are there to learn from you. Nobody knows everything. You can ask any physician and they are specialists in their area, but they still continue to go for continuing ed. And you're going to be part of that continuing ed, teaching them how to take better care of their patients. And I know that it made her feel better. So a lot of time people come to me and that can be an objection that I'm not ready. I just started out my business. And I always tell people, there's a story that I tell them that, had a client and she didn't think that she was ready. One of her questions was, what does a new speaker charge? And there's no such thing as what's a new speaker charge? How much value do you bring to that audience? Well, she ended up getting several $1,000 in her first paid speaking opportunity. We're talking north of $3,000. And so I was pretty darn proud of her. And so that's for somebody who was thinking that I wasn't, am I ready? So you can tell those stories in the form of the objections that you hear. So some of the common objections that you probably hear are time. So am I ready? Do I have enough time to do this? And also the investment. It's, to work with me, it is an investment, but like that particular woman that I'm just telling you about that had her first speaking event that was north of $3,000, that almost paid for itself. She got one more like that, and that would definitely have paid for our time working together. So if you asked her, do you think it was worth your investment? Her answer is going to be hell yes. So to be able to tell those stories. So think about some of the objections that people have for working with you or your product or your service, and answer it in the form of a story. And as a matter of fact, if you are in front of them, you can actually tell the story before they even raise the objection. There's a client that I had, and all I was doing, was wanted to help her with her business. And I just told her, I said, I'm just going to model the behavior that I think you should have. And all of her questions that she asked me, I had a story for. And so at the end when I thought about this, there were 3 different stories that I told her before she said yes. And I gotta say, it was a very entertaining, discovery call. And I had a blast, because you're gonna have a blast telling stories also, instead of trying to give all the facts and the figures about how you work with people. So let's see. I'm just flipping through my notes here, because there's a lot to tell you in regards to these stories. So besides Tom A. Sacker's book, the story Sandbox Wisdom, another great resource is Donald Miller's Story Brand. The book is on Audible. I will put a link to it as well. It's on Kindle, softcover, hardcover, and also the audio. And he gives some great information. As a matter of fact, if you happen to listen to Amy Porterfield, he happens to be a guest on last week's show. Let's see. So you start telling more stories. And let me just go back over here to the comments. In Sarah's book that I mentioned earlier, her book is Activate Your Life. So I know that Sarah has a very, very interesting story, and we are going to be trying to get her. We are definitely going to get her on stage to tell her story, because it is that fascinating. In the world of speaking, a lot of times that me and my speaker friends, there's this joke, when something amazing happens. And that amazing thing can be you accomplished something amazing, you overcame something, or you just, you had some sort of tragedy. We always say, gosh, I wish that had happened to me. But I want you all to realize, and when I say I wish that had happened to me, losing a limb, you don't need to lose a limb to have a great story. They are all around you. So I definitely want to encourage you to go back and watch that Facebook Live to help you start building your own story notebook, your own story, just a list of stories that you can call upon. And then you craft them really well. And when I say to craft them, recently took, Michael Haig has a 6-step process. And in that six, and Michael Haig is actually one of the advisors to like Will Smith and his wife when they are directing films. So let me just share with you what those 6 steps are, and some other time we can actually dive into them deeper. So number 1 is the setup. 2 is you introduce the crisis. 3 is the pursuit. 4 is the conflict. Then it's the climax, and then the aftermath. So there's always this beginning, this tension, the middle part, the solution, and then the it's over, like here's like in the greener pastures, if you will. So telling stories, I just want to encourage you all to be telling more stories. Tell more stories in your social media. Tell more stories in your blogs, your emails to your list, when you're on stage, when you are doing live streams. Stories sell. Stories activate more parts of the brain. That's great for your listeners to keep them engaged and keep them leaning into what you're saying. And stories are more memorable than the facts. And I can't tell you how many times that I have been walking down the street and somebody's like, "Oh my God, are you Laurie-Ann? I saw you speak at such and such. I remember your," and I always hear the jackknife story. And, it always makes me smile that that's a story that people remember. And hopefully he or she also remembered the lessons that went along with it. So tell you, I just want to realize that, like here we are in November here in the U.S. and next week, it's so weird to be saying this, but next week is Thanksgiving. And it's amazing how quickly the year has gone by. But I have a special offer that I am offering to my listeners, to everybody who's on my email list, and just want to let you know that I will put the link below. But I'm calling it Rent LA for 90 minutes, and you can rent me for 90 minutes. If you'd like to rent me for 90 minutes, just throw an emoji down below or put in a comment that you would like that information, and I will be sure to send you that link, because that link actually gives you a really huge discount. So if you would like to rent LA for 90, just throw a little comment in below. And I hope you all have a great week. This has been a jam-packed Facebook Live show, and I'm glad that you all were able to join me. And if you are watching the replay, please type in replay, and I will see you guys next Monday at noon as well. Have a great week.